Time now for the Newsmakers Show. A look behind the headlines with host Kevin Doran.
We have a mix of guests on this program. We have local folks, and we have people in the county level, state level, congressmen, senators, national figures. Every once in a while, we get a character on this show, and I don't mean that in the wrong sense, but someone on this show who has been up in the big leagues, not only been in the big leagues, but had a very important part to play in the running of the ship of state. We have such a man on our program today, Nofziger. Those of you who follow politics in America will know that name immediately. Nofziger was with President Reagan when he was the governor of California. He was a very important figure in his first election campaign and a very important figure in his first administration. This is one of those people who helped change the course of the ship of state. Good morning, Mr. Nofziger.
Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
Good. I don't know if you heard that introduction or not.
Yeah, I did, and I loved every word of it.
Well, that's... You know, I was saying on the program yesterday when I was telling them you were coming on, for people who don't follow politics as well as some of us, and that's okay because there are other things to do like baseball and football.
Much more important.
But the example I used, I said, this is the fellow, when President Reagan was shot in 1981, this is the fellow who stepped forward and became the press spokesman. The press secretary had been seriously wounded, and you just stepped into that job. And I think a lot of people will recall that because that's something all of us will remember. That was such an important moment. You've written a book now, right?
Yeah. Somebody persuaded me I ought to. It's not a serious book. It doesn't tell how I saved the nation or anything like that. But it's largely anecdotal. It's a book that I enjoyed writing. Hey, and I want it known I wrote it.
Okay. You don't have a Brent Bozell somewhere in the background?
No, nowhere.
You were with President Reagan when he was governor in California, right?
That's right.
Is that when you first met up with him?
Yeah, I met up with him, in the middle of 1965 when I was a reporter. President Reagan's brother was a longtime friend of mine, and when it looked like he was going to run for governor, I called his brother and asked him if he'd set up a meeting between the then movie actor and me, which he did, and at which meeting he denied that he was going to run for governor. So I went back and wrote a story saying he was going to run for governor.
You knew what was happening then. What was your first impression of Ronald Reagan?
A very nice man. You know, first impression is you can get to the surface things, but it's hard to tell whether a man is honest or brilliant or anything like that. It takes a little knowing of him or knowing about him. But I found him to be a very nice man, and later on I found him to be pretty smart and a very honest, decent individual.
Ed Meese has written a book. I'm sure you've read it recently.
Oh, yeah.
And the former Attorney General said that one of the great myths of American history, modern history, is that Ronald Reagan was not a hands-on president, that he slept through the first 4 years, didn't pay much attention in the second 4. What's the real truth of that situation?
Well, I probably disagree just a little bit with Ed, and I must say this. Ed spent a lot more time around him than I did because Ed likes government and I don't. But Reagan was a great delegator, and that's fine. I think he ought to be. But at the same time, Ed is right. In the Reagan stayed on top of things. He just didn't try to micromanage, and I wouldn't want Ed's book to give the impression that Reagan worried about all the details of government. He didn't, and deliberately, he didn't think that was his job.
He sort of set the course and then moved it and gave it to delegates, right?
Well, that's right, and made the tough decisions and was there when he had to be. But the idea of I always contrast him to Jimmy Carter. When Jimmy Carter first came into office, he literally kept the schedule on his desk of who played tennis on the White House tennis court. Right. Well, that's not the job of the president, and Reagan understood that instinctively.
Now, in the first administration, what exactly was your position?
I was the assistant to the president for political affairs.
That's a very important job. You must see the president a great deal in a job like that.
Well, you see him as often as you want to. One of the things that I've always thought in this business is you don't go bother somebody who has other things on his mind. And while politics is important, to getting the job done and so forth, it's not a policy job. I wasn't in there trying to steer him toward how you handle Nicaragua or anything like that. Our job was administration was to make sure that he got the support when he needed it.
When did you leave the administration?
Well, I only stayed a year. I hadn't intended to go at all. And when they finally convinced me that this was a job worth doing, I said, I'll give you a year, and I did. I then went back the next year for a couple of weeks to help Ronald Reagan make a success of one of the big mistakes of his administration, which was to pass a tax increase called TEFRA, and I always forget what it stood for. And I did that against my better judgment, and Reagan himself later admitted that was one of the big mistakes of his first term.
That sounds a little familiar because George Bush is saying the same kind of thing, isn't he?
Well, it's amazing that people don't seem to learn. Bush made exactly the same mistake as Reagan, and I keep wondering, where was he for all those 8 years?
I want to talk about George Bush, and I also want to talk about your political philosophy. We take a little break right now. This great American system called free enterprise. We have a commercial coming up. Don't go away.
Do you know why I'm shopping Canisteo Home Hardware this week?
'Cause they have propane gas exchange, and you are planning a cookout.
No.
'Cause you want some Blue Seal feed for your dog or your birds.
No.
'Cause you need to ship out a package, and you know that Canisteo Home Hardware has daily shipments.
No. I'm going to Canisteo Home Hardware because it's time for fixing up the wood heating system, and they have all those items, from things to clean to chimney to pipe and elbows.
How about ammo? They got ammo?
They certainly do. All a hunter would need for shotgun shells and 22 shells.
The name of the place is Canisteo Home Hardware, end of the park,
Bennett Street, Hornell.
Lynn Nofziger is our guest. By the way, your secretary, maybe it was you, said to one of our people here, be sure and tell that guy when he interviews Lynn, don't call him Nofziger.
No, it wasn't me. It was somebody else. Call me anything you want. Just call me for breakfast.
Let me suggest this to you. Suggested I call you Lynn. I will. The name Nofziger. I don't want to set off an ethnic incident here. What kind of a name is that?
Oh, it's German. It's German. Well, that's all I can tell you. It's German.
Nofsiger.
Oh, no. Nofziger.
Z-I. Did I say yes? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I've
did.
got it right in front of me, Z. All right. Nofziger. But anyway, they said don't call him Zinger. He doesn't like that. Lynn, you broke with President Reagan. Didn't you write an article, I believe, for Newsweek in which you went back after your old boss a little bit?
It wasn't for Newsweek. I wrote an op-ed piece that appeared in the Washington Post and then a number of other places, and I was critical of him because they dumped three of Reagan's very most loyal people off the board of his library foundation, Ed Meese and Bill Clark and Marty Anderson. And I thought it was not a proper thing for him to have done, and wrote a piece to that effect. He wasn't very happy. That's all right. I wasn't very happy either.
Have you all gotten back together again?
Oh, I've talked to him, but these things always put a strain on relationships, and Nancy's still mad at me, and as long as Nancy's mad at me, I presume things will remain a little strained.
She got a little angry at a few other people, didn't she?
Oh yeah, but Nancy gets angry at people who she thinks have been mean to her husband or who haven't served her husband well, and I can't blame her for that.
That's a rather human thing.
Yeah.
But the ones that she seems to get the most angry with are the conservatives, like Pat Buchanan, yourself, and is that right?
Well, yeah, it seems to. Although she got pretty angry at Don Regan, who's nobody's right winger. But Nancy got a little more liberal as time went on in the White House, and she was looking for her husband's place in history, and people had convinced her that conservatives don't go down as well in history as moderates.
That may be true, by the way.
Well, maybe. I don't worry about that, and I think Ronald Reagan did much better before he began thinking about his place in history.
Well, I say history in the short term. At least the newspaper reporters aren't quite as kind to you. Let me ask you about that. A lot of people maintain that George Bush is getting a real bum rap from the media. For example, he came out with that thing the other day about, he actually didn't come out with it, Congressman Doran did, and then he picked up on it. What was Bill Clinton doing in Moscow?
Yeah.
CNN last night led with a picture of Joe McCarthy
That's what you call unbiased reporting, is it not?
And then somebody else said, well, he's on the low path again. I think that was CBS. What do you think about the way the press is treating Bush? You're a reporter.
Well, I think that most of the national press, which every poll has always shown is about 3/4 liberal, maybe a little more than that, I think that they've kind of got a vested interest in electing Bill Clinton. And remember, most of these people come out of Bill Clinton's generation, and they share the same background and went through the Vietnam War at the same time. So I think that there's no question but what most of them would be happy to see Bill Clinton win. Incidentally, I was talking to somebody yesterday who came up with a very good line, who said, if we can't believe the things that Bill Clinton is saying about his past, how can we possibly believe anything he's promising for the future? Mm-hmm. So I've passed that on to the Bush people, hoping they would use it and we'll come back from almost sure defeat.
Well, that was my next question. Is this really kind of just a little motion we're going to go through here in a couple of weeks, or is the whole thing all over?
Well, no election's all over this far in advance. Somebody can always make a mistake, and if that somebody is Bill Clinton, why then he may be in trouble. He can foul up in the upcoming debates the way Jimmy Carter did or Jerry Ford did. He can something else can come up. We can find out more details about that trip to Russia and what really was behind it, if anything. And Bush somehow or other might possibly strike a spark. But if you had to bet today, don't put a lot of money on George Bush.
If George Bush calls you today, you'd give him that advice, but would you also go back and say something about you ought to have been a real conservative like Ronald Reagan was, at least in the first term? Would you say something like that?
I think he knows that I feel that way. And right now there's no sense in spilling over, crying over spilt milk. I think the thing you've got to do is figure out how you win this thing. And I think as you look at what he's been trying to do, he's been trying to go out and recapture the conservative wing of the party, and saying I won't raise taxes ever again, and I've learned my lesson, and those sorts of things.
You're not involved in this campaign.
They won't let old Reagan people into the campaign for the most part. A lot of us have said, "Hey, what can we do to help?" And their implied answer has been, "Go away and don't bother us." Really? Yeah.
So if they don't get a lot of conservative support on that November 3rd, they have themselves to blame. Is that what you're saying?
I think so to a great extent. They haven't made any real effort to go bring back the Reagan people, whom they have isolated over the last 3 years. If you were a Reagan person, it was hard to get a job in this administration. You really weren't welcome, and that's too bad, because that isn't how you win elections.
We're going to take not a commercial break. I want to take a break for your book. That's a commercial, I guess. Let's talk a little bit about how people can get your book.
Go to the bookstore and ask for it, and if you ask for it and it's not in the bookstore, they'll order it, obviously. But it should be in most bookstores. If not by now, certainly by the first of the week.
And the title is your name, right?
Yeah, Nofziger. That was the publisher's idea. He thought, well, that'll intrigue the heck out of him.
Who is the publisher?
Regnery Gateway.
All right, okay.
Same people who published Mises' book.
All right. So the book is called Nofziger. You can pick it up at your bookstore. If they don't have it, you can ask them to get it. You obviously know George Bush.
Yeah.
What kind of a fellow is he?
George Bush is a very nice man. He's he's a very decent individual. I think that the George Bush's problem is that he's wanted to govern well, but hasn't really had any idea of where he wanted to take this country.
Mm-hmm. There's an argument out there that we ought to have pragmatists who take every day as it comes and make the best of it. Others say we ought to have ideologues, people who have a real vision. I know which way you're going to vote. But,
yeah, amen.
You're going to vote for the ideologues. But on the other hand, isn't it true that these pragmatists, it happened to Bush, and it happened, I think you could argue, to Ford, that if they don't really have this vision that Ronald Reagan had, or some kind of a vision, they don't get very far. Would you argue that that's a...
Well, I think that's fair enough.
Yeah.
I think you've got to stand for something. I think that when the American people elect a president, they're not electing just somebody to go through the motions and make sure that the books are balanced, which they never are. I think they elect somebody who they think believes in the things they believe in and has confidence in the American people and that sort of thing.
Are we seeing an end to the conservatives in government for a while?
I think that it's very likely that we're going to have a 4-year hiatus here, but I'm not all that disturbed about it because I think that parties get old and tired in office, and the Republicans have been in there for 12 years now, and they kind of lose their sense of direction. And if we lose this election, why then it gives us a chance to go back and find out what we're all about and reinvigorate ourselves and go have a lot of fun attacking the enemy, and then come back in 4 years.
Who would you like to see it reinvigorate itself around? Who's your choice for next time?
There are half a dozen people out there. I'm a fan of Bill Bennett's, and I'm a fan of Jack Kemp's, but there are other good people out there. The people like Pete DuPont and Phil Graham and one or two others.
Lynn Nofziger, our time is up. I want to thank you very much for being here. It's been a real honor to talk to you.
Well, I enjoyed it immensely.
And I'm looking forward to getting your book.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun writing it.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Lynn Nofziger, a very key man in the Reagan years, and just come out with a new book called Nofziger. And would you know, I'd misspell it. I have it right in front of me with a Z, and then I said S. I do that a lot. I wonder if the psychologist could tell me what that means. Anyway, I want to tell you about Monday's show. An old friend of mine who spent 6 years as a POW in Vietnam. Robert Naughton, retired as a Navy captain, was a Navy pilot. I believe he was out on a reconnaissance, or no, he was out trying to find a downed pilot when he got shot down himself. Did 6 years in Vietnam. I have him coming up on Monday. He's now working for NASA training astronauts in Texas. That'll be an interesting show. I hope you'll join us at that time. News coming up next. This is ABC Hornell, WLEA, AM 1480.